My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I've been a paranormal investigator for over a decade. Throughout the years, I've seen and experienced things that would make most people question their sanity. However, the case of the Johnson family was different. When my assistant, James Carter, and I were called to help them, I knew we were about to face something extraordinarily sinister. The Johnsons had recently moved into a secluded house in the countryside, seeking peace and quiet. Emily, her husband David, and their two children, Alice and Tommy, were hoping for a fresh start. What they found was a living nightmare. From the very first night, they were tormented by strange sounds, objects moving on their own, and disturbing nightmares that plagued the children. As James and I approached the house, I felt a heavy, oppressive energy in the air. It was as if the house itself was alive, watching and waiting. Little did we know, we were about to confront forces far beyond our understanding, forces that would test our physical and mental limits. Upon our arrival, Emily Johnson greeted us with weary eyes and a pale face that spoke volumes more than words ever could. David, her husband, was skeptical but clearly disturbed. The children, Alice and Tommy, seemed listless, as if something had drained all the joy from their lives. Emily detailed the harrowing experiences they had been enduring. Strange noises echoed through the halls at night, whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves, and Alice had started drawing unsettling images of figures she claimed to see in her dreams. Deciding to spend the night in the house to observe, we prepared ourselves for anything. As the sun set, the house came alive. Footsteps echoed from the upstairs rooms, even though everyone was downstairs. Doors creaked and slammed shut on their own. At one point, while James was inspecting the basement, he caught a glimpse of a shadow moving swiftly, but upon investigation, found nothing. Meanwhile, I felt a cold, suffocating presence behind me, but when I turned around, there was no one there. In the following days, I delved into the house's history and discovered it had once belonged to a cult notorious for its dark rituals. Decades ago, they had performed sinister ceremonies in an attempt to communicate with other dimensions. The house had been abandoned after a series of mysterious disappearances in the area, coinciding with the cult's activities. In the attic, we found an old book filled with spells and symbols, suggesting that the rituals conducted there had never been properly concluded or cleansed. Determined to understand the full extent of what we were dealing with, I continued my research. We discovered a secret room in the basement, its walls covered in occult inscriptions and symbols. It appeared to be an altar dedicated to an unknown entity. Local records revealed that many who had lived in or near the house had either disappeared or returned profoundly disturbed and mentally unstable. This history of the house painted a terrifying picture, but it was Emily who seemed to have an unconscious connection to the past events. Emily began having dreams about a woman with long hair and hollow eyes who beckoned her to a hidden room in the house. Describing the room, Emily unwittingly detailed the secret basement chamber perfectly. It became clear that Emily's presence had somehow awakened the malevolent force that had lain dormant for so long. As the days passed, the paranormal activity escalated alarmingly. Dishes flew off shelves, mirrors shattered without cause, and the whispers became audible voices speaking in an ancient language. Even the neighborhood animals avoided the property, and the plants around the house began to wither inexplicably. The children's nightmares grew worse. Alice and Tommy frequently woke up screaming, describing a shadowy figure trying to pull them into the walls. Alice started speaking in a tongue she had never learned, and her drawings became more detailed, depicting scenes of torture and dark rituals. James and I began to suspect that the children played a crucial role in the entity's plans, as if they were pieces of a sinister puzzle. One particularly violent evening, Emily was temporarily possessed by the entity. Her eyes turned milky white, and a guttural voice replaced her own as she attacked David. It took every ounce of strength and knowledge we had to recite a spell from the book we found, bringing Emily back to her senses. But she was deeply traumatized, and the entity's power was only growing stronger. The sense of urgency intensified as we realized we were running out of time. The entity's hold on the house, and on Emily, was tightening, and if we didn't act soon, we risked losing not just the Johnson family, but possibly our own lives as well. As the intensity of the paranormal activity grew, so did our determination to put an end to it. We knew we had to confront the entity and sever its connection to the house and the Johnsons. James and I prepared for what felt like the battle of our lives. We researched tirelessly, digging into every available piece of information about the cult that had once inhabited this cursed place. Our efforts revealed the leader of the cult had claimed to have made contact with a powerful spirit that promised knowledge and eternal life. Instead, it brought madness and death to those who dared summon it. The most unsettling part was the rumor that the spirit demanded a sacrifice to seal its bond with the physical world. The revelation cast a dark shadow over Emily's situation. Her dreams of the hollow-eyed woman beckoning her to the secret room now made terrifying sense. The entity had targeted her as the vessel for its return, feeding off her vulnerability and the unresolved trauma rooted in the house's history. We had no choice but to prepare for an exorcism, knowing that failure was not an option. We reached out to Father O'Malley, an experienced priest who had assisted in similar cases. He agreed to help, sensing the urgency and gravity of our situation. Together, we planned the exorcism for the next new moon, the only time the entity would be at its weakest according to the cult's twisted texts. As the day of the ritual approached, the house became more hostile. Shadows danced along the walls, and the temperature would drop suddenly, leaving us shivering with dread. The entity's presence was unmistakable, an ever-watchful force that lurked just beyond the veil of reality. Emily's condition worsened as well. She oscillated between states of eerie calmness and violent outbursts, her eyes sometimes clouding over as if she were looking through someone else's eyes. Her connection to the spirit grew more apparent, and it became clear that she was its chosen conduit. The night before the exorcism, I sat with Emily, trying to offer comfort and reassurance. She was exhausted, her strength drained by the relentless presence gnawing at her soul. "I don't know how much longer I can fight it," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I took her hand and promised we would save her and her family. But deep down, I was unsure if we truly understood the force we were about to challenge. Finally, the night of the exorcism arrived. The air was heavy with anticipation and fear as we gathered in the basement, the heart of the haunting. We set up candles around the altar and opened the Book of Rituals, its pages yellowed with age and inscribed with words that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Father O'Malley, James, and I stood around Emily, who was seated in the center of the room. The children were safely with neighbors, away from the horrors that would soon unfold. As Father O'Malley began the exorcism rites, the room grew cold, and an unnatural wind whipped through the basement, extinguishing candles as it passed. The oppressive feeling of dread intensified, pressing against us like a physical weight. Emily began to convulse, her body writhing as if trying to escape an unseen grip. Her eyes rolled back, and that guttural voice emerged again, spewing curses and promises of doom. James and I held her down, desperately trying to keep her safe as Father O'Malley continued chanting. The entity fought back with everything it had, manifesting apparitions of the cultists who had once worshipped in this very spot. They appeared around us, ghostly figures draped in shadow, their eyes empty and hollow. They began to chant, echoing the priest's words, but twisting them into a mockery of the holy rites. A sense of hopelessness started to creep in. The entity's power was overwhelming, a relentless tide of malevolence that threatened to drown us in despair. But just as I felt the last of my strength fading, Emily managed to break through the entity's grip for a brief moment. Her eyes met mine, filled with fear but also determination. "Don't let it take me," she pleaded. Her words reignited my resolve. With renewed determination, I joined Father O'Malley in reciting the exorcism prayers, my voice rising above the cacophony of the entity's wails and the cultists' ghostly murmurs. Slowly, the atmosphere began to shift. The oppressive weight lifted, and the shadows recoiled as if burned by an invisible light. Then, with a final, ear-piercing scream, the entity was expelled from Emily, its presence vanishing like smoke in the wind. Emily collapsed, her body limp but finally free from the spirit's grasp. The air cleared, and the oppressive atmosphere that had clung to the house for so long dissipated, leaving a sense of peace in its wake. We were all exhausted but relieved beyond measure. Emily's ordeal was over, and the house was finally free of its dark past. As the first light of dawn crept through the basement windows, we knew the battle had been won, but not without a cost. Emily would need time to heal, and the Johnson family would carry the scars of this nightmare forever. As for James and me, we knew this case would linger in our minds, a reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows and the strength needed to confront it. After the exorcism, there was a tangible relief in the air. The house, which had felt so oppressive and alive with malevolence, seemed almost ordinary now. The sun's rays streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes floating lazily in the air, and it was hard to believe that only hours ago, this place had been a battleground for our souls. Emily was resting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, looking pale but peaceful. David sat by her side, holding her hand tightly, as if afraid that letting go might allow the entity to reclaim her. The children were brought back from the neighbors, and they rushed to their mother's side, relieved to see her smiling weakly at them. It was a moment of quiet victory, but the exhaustion on all our faces told the real story. Father O'Malley stayed for a while, offering prayers and blessings over the family and the house. His presence was calming, a reassuring reminder that light could indeed triumph over darkness. He spoke to me in hushed tones before leaving, expressing his relief that we had succeeded, but warning that such entities might always seek a way back if given a chance. It was a sobering thought that settled uneasily in my mind. James and I helped tidy up the remnants of our ritual, gathering the burnt-out candles and discarded pages from the spellbook. Despite the calm, my mind was still racing, replaying every moment of the exorcism, every detail of what had transpired. I had faced many things in my years as an investigator, but this was the first time I had come so close to losing myself in the process. As we prepared to leave, Emily approached me, her eyes still holding the remnants of fear, but also a newfound strength. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice raw with emotion. "I don't know what we would have done without you and James." I nodded, trying to muster a reassuring smile. "You're safe now, Emily. Just remember, it's important to keep your family close and to talk about what happened. Don't let the shadows linger." She nodded, understanding the weight of my words. Trauma like this didn't just vanish overnight. It needed to be faced, understood, and finally put to rest. As much as we had expelled the entity, its scars would remain. Driving away from the Johnsons' house, James and I were silent for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. The road stretched out before us, winding through the countryside, and the peaceful scenery was a stark contrast to the chaos we had just left behind. "I didn't think we were going to make it for a moment there," James finally admitted, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but I could hear the edge of tension underneath. That thing was powerful, more than anything we've faced before. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the road. "It was close, too close, but you held your ground, James. We both did." I glanced over at him, seeing the lines of fatigue on his face. "It's a reminder of what we're up against, why we do this. Not every story ends like this. Not every family gets saved." James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "But we saved this one. That counts for something, right?" "It counts for everything," I replied, meaning every word. Despite the darkness we confronted, it was moments like this that validated our work, that gave us the strength to face the next haunting, the next unexplained event. The case had taken its toll, though, and I could feel the exhaustion creeping into my bones. I knew I needed time to process everything that had happened, to recharge before diving into another investigation. I had a feeling that James felt the same way, and I made a mental note to give us both a few days of rest before picking up our next case. When we returned to the city, I dropped James off at his apartment, promising to catch up over dinner in a few days. He nodded, grateful for the brief respite from the supernatural chaos that had engulfed our lives. I watched him disappear into his building before heading home. As I settled into my own apartment, I found myself lingering on the details of the Johnson case, unable to shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. The entity's malevolence was unlike anything I'd ever encountered, and I couldn't help but wonder if we'd truly seen the last of it. I tried to dismiss the thought, reminding myself that we had done everything in our power to cleanse the house and protect the family. Yet, as night fell and the familiar sounds of the city echoed through my window, I couldn't shake the unease that settled over me. I lay awake in bed, my mind drifting back to the cultists' ghostly forms, the shadows that had seemed so real. I had always known this line of work came with its share of dangers, but the Johnson case had shown me just how thin the veil between our world and theirs truly was. Eventually, sleep found me, though it was restless and filled with unsettling dreams. I awoke the next morning, determined to push forward, to continue the work I was meant to do. There would always be another case, another mystery to unravel, and I needed to be ready. As I sipped my morning coffee, I considered reaching out to Emily in a few weeks, just to see how she and her family were faring. It was important to me that they continued to heal, to rebuild their lives free from the shadows that had once threatened to consume them. For now, though, I would take a moment to appreciate the quiet, to find solace in the knowledge that we had made a difference. And as I prepared for whatever lay ahead, I knew I would carry the lessons of the Johnson case with me, a reminder of the darkness lurking in the corners of the world and the light needed to drive it away. A few weeks had passed since the exorcism at the Johnson house, and life had returned to a semblance of normalcy. I spent the days catching up on mundane tasks that had been neglected during the investigation. Laundry, grocery shopping, even attempting to tame the wild jungle of plants on my apartment balcony. It was a welcome change from the intensity of confronting malevolent spirits. But as much as I tried to relax and unwind, a part of me remained tethered to that house and the ordeal we had faced. James and I met for dinner one evening, finally ready to talk about everything that had happened. It was good to see him, his usual easygoing demeanor restored, though I could tell the experience had left its mark on him too. We laughed about the trivial things that had seemed so insignificant in the shadow of the supernatural. His car's persistent check engine light, my overflowing inbox, and the peculiar habits of our elderly neighbor who liked to keep an eye on all the comings and goings in our building. Over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, we debriefed about the case, discussing the events in detail now that we had some distance from the chaos. James brought up the apparition of the cultists, how their chants had almost overwhelmed the room with darkness. The way the entity had twisted their words into something powerful and destructive was something neither of us could shake. It was a reminder of how close we'd come to losing the battle, and it left us both pondering the thin line between our world and theirs. "Do you think it's really over?" James asked, swirling his wine glass thoughtfully. His question hung in the air, the unspoken fear that maybe we hadn't quite severed all the ties to the entity. I paused, considering my response. "I think we did everything we could," I replied finally. "The house feels different now, lighter. But who knows what we're really dealing with out there. I'm just glad the Johnsons are safe, and that we got out relatively unscathed." James nodded, though his expression was still troubled. "Yeah, but I keep thinking about Emily and how deeply the entity had its hooks in her. Do you think she'll be okay?" "That's why I want to check in on them," I said, "just to make sure everything's really settled. Sometimes these things have a way of lingering, even after the worst is over." We made a plan to visit the Johnsons the following weekend, just to reassure ourselves that they were moving on and to offer any further support they might need. Until then, I focused on grounding myself back in the rhythm of daily life, though the shadows of that experience were never far from my thoughts. The day of our visit dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for a drive into the countryside. As we approached the familiar path leading to the Johnsons' house, I felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. It was strange to return to a place that had been the site of such turmoil, now transformed into a place of healing. The house itself seemed more welcoming, its presence no longer heavy with the oppressive energy that had clung to it for so long. Emily greeted us at the door, looking healthier and more at ease than I had ever seen her. There was color in her cheeks, and she smiled warmly, inviting us in with genuine gratitude. "It's so good to see you both," she said, ushering us into the living room. "I can't tell you how much things have changed since you were last here." David was in the kitchen, preparing coffee, and the children were playing outside, their laughter echoing through the open windows. The transformation was remarkable, and I felt a profound sense of relief seeing them all thriving after such a harrowing ordeal. We sat together, sipping coffee and catching up. Emily shared how they had worked together as a family to rebuild their lives, discussing the events openly and seeking therapy to help process the trauma. It was heartening to hear how they had refused to let the darkness linger, choosing instead to embrace the light of their renewed life together. "I've been having dreams," Emily admitted after a while, her expression growing serious. "Not like before, though. These are different. They're more like memories, I think. Or maybe something else entirely." I leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of dreams?" She hesitated, as if unsure how to articulate the strange occurrences in her subconscious. "I see the woman from before, the one with the hollow eyes. But she's not threatening. It's like she's trying to show me something. Places, moments in time, but I don't recognize any of it." James and I exchanged a glance, curious and concerned. Dreams often carried meaning, and in cases like this, they could sometimes reveal lingering elements of the past. "Do you think it's connected to the entity?" James asked, echoing my own thoughts. Emily shook her head slowly. "I don't think so. These dreams feel different. They're not dark or heavy. It's more like they're revealing a story, one I'm supposed to understand." We talked for a while longer, speculating about the nature of these dreams and their possible significance. Perhaps they were remnants of the house's history, glimpses of the lives that had been touched by the malevolence we had expelled. Or perhaps they were Emily's mind processing the past, finding a way to reconcile with the trauma she had endured. Before leaving, we promised to stay in touch, to continue supporting them as they navigated this new chapter of their lives. As we drove away, I felt a sense of closure, knowing that the Johnsons were finding their way forward. But Emily's dreams lingered in my mind, a mystery that hinted at untold stories waiting to be uncovered. The experience at the Johnson house had been a reminder of the complexities of our work, the layers of history and human experience that intertwined with the supernatural. Each case was a puzzle, with pieces that sometimes refused to fit neatly together, and yet, that was what made this work so compelling. As James and I drove back to the city, I couldn't help but wonder about the next case, the next mystery that would call us into its depths. Whatever lay ahead, I felt ready to face it, armed with the knowledge that even in the darkest places, there was always a glimmer of light waiting to be discovered. Several weeks after our visit to the Johnsons, life had settled into a routine that almost felt normal. Emily's cryptic dreams stayed on my mind, but they no longer haunted my thoughts. I threw myself into research and planning for upcoming cases, taking comfort in the familiar rhythms of investigation and preparation. There were always more mysteries to unravel, more stories that begged to be told, and I found solace in the process of piecing together the unknown. James and I stayed in touch with the Johnsons, exchanging emails and phone calls. They seemed to be doing well, embracing their newfound peace, and the children were thriving. Emily's dreams persisted, but they remained enigmatic and elusive. Despite our best efforts, we couldn't make sense of them, so we decided to let them lie until more clues emerged. In the meantime, James and I took on a few smaller cases, gradually building up our confidence again. These cases were routine and relatively straightforward. Haunted houses with benign spirits, unexplained noises in old buildings, nothing quite as intense as what we'd faced before. They reminded us of why we started this work, of the intrigue and curiosity that first drew us to the paranormal. But a part of me was always on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. One afternoon, as I was reviewing notes in my office, my phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice, usually calm and steady, was laced with urgency. "Sarah, it's happening again," she said, her words rushing out in a torrent of anxiety. My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, Emily? Are you and your family okay?" "Yes, we're fine. But I had another dream last night, and this one was different. I saw a place I've never seen before. I think it's somewhere in the city. It felt important, like I need to find it." I listened as Emily described the location. An old building with faded brick and tall, narrow windows. She mentioned an alley that ran alongside it, where the shadows seemed deeper than they should be. Her description was so vivid that I could almost see it in my mind, yet I couldn't place it. "Do you think it's related to the entity?" I asked, scribbling notes as she spoke. "I'm not sure," she admitted, "but I woke up with this feeling that I need to go there, like there's something waiting for me." I promised to help her investigate, knowing full well that dreams in our line of work often pointed towards something significant. As I hung up the phone, I felt a familiar mix of excitement and apprehension. This was what we did. After all, we followed the threads of the unknown, wherever they might lead. That evening, I met with James, relaying Emily's latest dream and our plan to investigate. He was intrigued, his curiosity piqued by the prospect of uncovering another layer of the mystery. "It's worth checking out," he agreed. "Even if it's nothing, at least we'll know for sure." The next day, armed with Emily's descriptions, we set out to find the building. It was a cold morning, the kind where the air feels sharp and clear, lending a sense of clarity to our mission. We walked the city streets, scanning each block for signs of the place she described. For hours we searched, starting downtown and slowly expanding our search radius. Just when I began to wonder if we'd missed something, or if it had all been a wild goose chase, James stopped in his tracks. "There," he said, pointing across the street to a narrow alley flanked by a faded brick building with tall, narrow windows. My breath caught in my throat. It was exactly as Emily had described. The alley beside the building seemed to swallow the light, casting long shadows that twisted and turned like living things. We crossed the street, approaching with caution, the weight of our anticipation growing with each step. The building was old, its facade showing the wear of countless seasons. A weathered sign hung above the door, letters faded with age and neglect. I pushed the door open, and we stepped inside, the air cold and still. It was as if time had forgotten this place, leaving it untouched by the world outside. Inside, the building was empty, its large rooms echoing with our footsteps. Dust coated the floors and clung to every surface. But there was something else, too. A sense of expectation, a feeling that we were not alone. As we explored, we discovered remnants of its past. Faded photographs on the walls, old furniture draped in sheets, the ghosts of another era. It was in one of the back rooms that we found the first real clue. A collection of old newspapers, carefully stacked in the corner, caught my attention. I rifled through them, noting the dates from decades past. There, buried among the pages, was an article about a woman who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Her name was familiar, one of the cultists from the Johnson case, the woman Emily had described in her dreams. My mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. This was where it had all started, where the rituals had begun. Emily's dreams were leading us back to the source, to the origins of the entity that had haunted her family. But the question remained, why? What was waiting for us here? As we stood in that dusty room, piecing together the fragments of the past, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air seemed to thrum with energy, a pulsing undercurrent that vibrated through the walls. James looked at me, his expression a mirror of my own, an uneasy mix of awe and apprehension. Whatever had drawn us here, whatever truth lay hidden in these walls, we were on the brink of discovering it. I could feel it in my bones, a deep certainty that this was just the beginning of another dark journey. And though the path ahead was uncertain, I knew we couldn't turn back now. Not when we were so close to uncovering the secrets that had remained buried for so long. We had come too far, and there was no denying the call of the unknown, the pull of the darkness that beckoned us forward into its depths. This was the work we had chosen, the life we had embraced, and we would see it through to the end, wherever it might lead.